for today, we are going to move on, and we have our next discussion is coming from Bastiaan, who really has some exciting stuff going on. We already heard a little bit about. Uh, well, never mind. I'll let him introduce it. Bastiaan, what's going on at Zambezi?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Anand, for creating this platform. And yeah, I agree, Chris. Like there's never enough time, and completely surrender myself to your time management here because if I get if I get to explain every nook and cranny of what we're doing, then we're definitely going to need a couple hours. Um, I'm Bastiaan Den Braber. I'm based in Los Angeles. I'm building a company that's called Zambezi. It's named after the Zambezi River in Africa. It's the lifeline of 5 different countries, runs straight through the continent, and it's also where we're doing our pilot project, our proof of concept, which is to protect 84,000 acres. And really, what we're doing is we're building a super intelligence for the nature economy. And we have a global audience here, so it's probably pretty well understood on why we need it. In the US, it's a little different. Europe is definitely leading the charge. And to support my story, I'm going to share some slides here. I know that's usually not very common here, but I think it will help narrate the story a bit here. Let me see here. This goes in full mode. Yes. So, there's interesting things happening there. There's a push and pull happening in the market that I'll get to in a second. One of the metrics that hopefully is well known is that we're losing about $10 trillion every single year already in global economic output, and that's from adverse events from nature, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, fires, all of those things. And the reason why that is directly correlated to nature is actually pretty well expressed in the way the United Nations presents the Sustainable Development Goals, which they usually present in this table of elements view. But in this view here on the left, that's also from the United Nations. They show the biosphere as the foundation with 4 Sustainable Development Goals, and society is built on top of that, and the economy is built on top of society. And that's a really good depiction because it shows if you take away the biosphere, the functioning of the biosphere, society is not going to function as well, neither is the economy. So even for the most staunch economist or capitalist, you want society and biosphere to be functioning well, otherwise, capitalism can't function. And the bullet points I'm highlighting here on the right are aligned to that sort of that pyramid, where at the top level we see that we're losing this enormous amount of GDP every year, and it's about, depending how you count, about 6 to 8% of global economic output is already actually lost, and it's not really accounted for in a clear way, other than these reports from McKinsey and PricewaterhouseCoopers as such, because the accounting standards don't highlight these things particularly, but this damage disappears in P&Ls and balance sheets. And the 10 trillion is the actualized loss of 55% of global GDP that is at risk. That means that 20 to 25% of the GDP that's at risk is actually already lost. And the risk percentage is going up, and the actualization percentage is also going up. That means that $10 trillion is rapidly increasing in number. So even if you're the most staunch capitalist, you will want the effects from nature loss to be mitigated. That's the bottom line. So if you go all the way down the pipeline, we see that at a society level, we have one of the other speakers today earlier from Africa also spoke about this. We currently have 35 million climate refugees, and that's all a consequence of declining food production, declining water availability, and destabilizing climate conditions. And we also see this biospheres collapsing due to species extinction, sea level rise, drought, severe weather, fires, etc. And that's all driving that top level number of $10 trillion. And at the bottom level, in this pyramid, you see that the largest species extinction is happening with a 73% decline in monitored wildlife population in the last 50 years. So since 1975, we've lost 73%. Another fun fact, and then I'll move on, is that of all wild mammals in the world, only 4% is wild. That means that 96% are pets and cattle. Just let that sink in for a second. So what we're really seeing now, and this is where things are becoming more sort of interesting from an economic perspective, is that we're seeing a shift from the older paradigm, which is, it's the economy first, it's economy stupid, right? To a nature positive transition that's really accelerating right now to a nature first economy where we can say it's nature stupid to mitigate all that loss, and not just to mitigate the loss. So the loss mitigation is forecasted in 2030 to be $44 trillion annual loss. So it's literally 4.4 times as much as is happening today. And the nature positive transition requires about a $4 trillion annual investment. The output of that is not just mitigating 44 trillion, it's also a plus $10 trillion annual value by 2030. So overall, we can do a 5x better if we make these investments in the nature economy. And what are the sort of the key drivers there? One of them is capital diversion. We're already seeing this happening in Europe, especially with the Norwegian Sovereign Investment Fund, with their, what is it, 1.6, $1.8 trillion under investment. They are actively doing this capital diversion away from businesses that only deplete natural resources towards businesses that looking at regeneration and risk mitigation and actually constructively look at the biospheres and the societies that they rely on for those to be successful. And then it becomes also a tool in managing biodiversity risk to improve productivity and resilience and to really earn the license to operate as a company by making sure that their fiduciary responsibilities are actually taken serious. And that also translates into the risk and opportunities because it is a risk to lose tremendous amounts of value, but it's also a dramatic opportunity to really improve business performance. And one aspect that nothing is new here. The former CEO of Unilever, Paul Polman, he wrote a book about this, and he started this thing 10 years ago across Unilever, one of the largest and most complex companies in the world. And they have implemented this thinking for about 10 years already. And they've dramatically outperformed their peers in their market based on these simple principles. So I mentioned push and pull in earlier on, and what we're seeing is that from the bottom up, from a conservation perspective, an environmental perspective, managing ecosystems, there is a strong need for intelligence to drive the efficacy of their operations, to not be just dependent on non-profit money and human resources, but to be able to leverage the scalability of technology to really advance their operations and to also be able to find that connection point into financial markets. And that's where the pool is coming from. Nature credit platforms, environmental asset accounting, biodiversity credits, tokenization, insurers coming into the market wanting to see corporations take ownership of their risks. The investment market, like the Norwegian Sovereign Investment Fund, requiring their companies to be taking this kind of responsibility, creating the transparency of which assets are at risk and how they're mitigating that risk. So these two worlds, interestingly enough, are coming together. And this is something that's has been in development, but is really happening today. And especially in Europe, we see this happening really rapidly. So what is the problem with that? Well, we see that corporates, governments, investors, funders, insurance, the decision makers there, they lack the granular, verifiable, and continuous biodiversity intelligence to mitigate nature risk at a detailed level. And what we see is currently we have at global level, we see regulations, standards coming into play. Everything is a four-letter acronym. But it makes having this verifiable and near real-time data unavoidable to do those, to be compliant with those standards, to do that really effectively. And they're also becoming more stringent. They're relatively high level now. They're becoming more stringent by the year. So the European Union, for instance, two of those standards already require 60,000 of the world's largest companies and the seven largest commodities to report and manage their nature impact from 2024 onward. So that's already happening. But today's default approach is satellite-based. It's called remote sensing, but because it's satellite, they're long time intervals. They're exclusively on flora, soil health, what's happening with the oceans, very high level stuff and longer time intervals. and they don't see and they don't solve any problems on the ground. So it's part of the solution, but it's only a fraction of the solution, and it's definitely not granular and detailed enough from the bottom up in terms of really understanding the complex ecosystems that biodiversity are. So what we are doing is we're flipping this equation around. We're starting with our core intelligence operating system as the first service that we're building. And it really takes some of the remote sensing data from satellites, but really sensor data from on the ground into the system. We do the data fusion in a semantic knowledge graph. We put it on a digital twin, and we can simulate in real time all the things, all the scenarios that can play out on the ground, and that produces predictive intelligence that can be used to prevent incidents in nature from happening. So this is kind of the tools that really corporations, insurance, funders will want to have see being used in the projects and on the ground where they're involved in. So, because this maximizes the responsibility and the accountability and the ownership, any company that works with nature can take ownership of the risk and mitigate things from happening in the first place. And by building out that core intelligence, that operating system, we can start building upwards towards where the pool is coming from in different ways. We can build a super intelligence that I'll get to. We can feed into anti-wildlife crime services like the Interpols of this world, which has a whole bunch of different vertical other crimes, not just wildlife crime. It's drug trafficking, human trafficking, weapons trafficking. They're all the same networks. Another vertical is the compliance reporting into the standards we just talked about, into biodiversity impact tokens and biodiversity credits, all of sort of the instruments that allow for the translation of what's happening on the ground into metrics that are verifiable and that can be institutionalized towards the financial markets. And then lastly, this kind of data equally applies to not just biodiversity as in the nature that we see as conservation, but also the highly nature dependent markets and nature sort of conservation adjacent industries like agriculture, mining, agroforestry, beverage companies, even things like border patrol. There's a whole array of sectors that are very adjacent and dependent on rich and well-functioning biodiversity. So the toolkit that we're developing equally applies to those different sectors, just different use case and different AI models ultimately to feed the decision makers. And the way we're approaching this, I won't go too deep on this kind of stuff, but it's really a full stack software solution that can take the data from the ground up, doing the data ingestion from the IoT sensors, from satellites, all this stuff into one data environment where we can do the data fusion. And that's really the trick that allows us to do the predictive intelligence without disturbing day-to-day operations. Won't go too much into this. And the way we're looking at it from a conservation perspective is that the power really sits in the AI models that use that, where after the data fusion happens and we have that available on a digital twin. Now it's okay, what models are we running to inform operations? And these are four major use cases in conservation: anti-poaching, human wildlife conflict prevention, managing the ecosystem. That's the one that is generally transferable across different industries, and the safe reintroduction of species. So we have 18 different AI models that we're actively building and testing, and that will dramatically enhance the resource deployment efficacy and the outcomes, the impact outcomes on the ground, which also justifies the funding of those kind of activities. And then what we talked about before a little bit is the future enterprise services. Once that foundation, those foundational models are built, is the super intelligence, which is really when building AI models and they're trained to an optimal point, they don't need constant training. They can be deployed at a relatively light level on a mobile phone. And in continents like Africa, Southern America, where everybody has a mobile phone in their pocket, they can run these models without needing the whole backend infrastructure. They just need a couple of inputs to inform the models, and then they can provide the intelligence on almost a per person basis, rather than needing the full-fledged implementation. So that's when we start talking about super intelligence, as in being able to spread it out, deploy it thousands of times, and not just individual projects. We talked about the compliance and the nature credit stuff already, so I'll move on from that. And then this is just to whack everybody over the head with a lot of dots. It's a depiction of how superintelligence works and how to think about going from a single project and a single AI model to something that can work at a planetary level. So when you have one client, you're on the left, and client number N, X, Y, Z on the right. Each one of them will have a sensor network on the peripheral with all these little dots. Those are all sensors that feed into a single sensor network, which informs a specific AI model. And a cluster of different AI models informs a larger AI model that looks at all these different pieces of intelligence and creates the prediction that all these sensors are telling us about what is likely going to happen and how we can mitigate that. Once we optimize that for at a specific use case level, we can start bringing it up to a country level, and we can bring it up to a regional level, and we can bring it up to a planetary level. That's kind of where a simple intelligence from a single sensor and a single AI goes to multiple AI models that are working together to fully optimizing a use case and then being able to scale that pretty much infinitely until we've dealt with all the planetary issues. And where that positions us and players like us is really kind of the Palantir of sustainability, where we can provide compliance-grade infrastructure versus just project-specific tools. And we can do predictive intelligence versus sort of the passive monitoring, which a lot of the solutions today still are. So when you think about what Palantir is doing, whether you like it or not, what if we apply that same rigor and power and intensity to sustainability and regeneration? And we allow governments will be one stakeholder, but we also allow the financial markets and the insurers to be able to get a grip on what is happening in nature and be able to um, kind of industrialize that at enterprise grade services so they can have the kind of governance in place that allows them to put funding towards protecting, preserving, regenerating nature as part of the entire economic ecosystem. And happily enough, it's also a pretty big market. And this is very stripped down. Actually, the numbers were much bigger before, but I wanted to be as conservative as possible. And we're looking at 150, 250 billion total addressable market by 2030. And that is the global market for environmental monitoring and biodiversity analytics. And that's just the software part. We're not even counting hardware. And even when you drill it down to sort of conservation grade projects, and then looking at for us specifically, for like we want to be live with 200 client projects by 2030, then we're already talking $100 million revenue company. So there's abundance here. And the way we go to market is realistically, with a realistic mindset, because we know that this is a very evolving market. It's a nascent market. You saw the European standards. They're still, they're just been, what was the first one, 2024, put in place. Some of them have objectives by 2030. So this is really a market that is growing and developing and evolving. So where we're starting at is really building the foundation on the ground, 50 to 75 high credibility parts first, acting as proof points. We're looking at funding those through blended finance. Part of it is venture capital investment, private investments, government subsidies, philanthropic funding. And this really is to deliver the dramatic reduction in incidents, faster responses, and really developing this biodiversity intelligence core data sets that can be evolved and expanded on later. And when we get to that expansion, we're talking about building that super intelligence. And we can also start looking at how do we diversify these intelligence solutions across different market verticals. So agriculture, agroforestry are the most nascent and adjacent to conservation. And at this time, we're already making dramatic impact. And then once we have established that, we can start locking in, partnering more with the institutionalized organization, providing MRV, which is measure, report, validate the platforms and TNFD implementers and CSRD implementation organizations, etc. And then ultimately, when all of this is evolving, we can look at sort of the master plan of anti-crime and anti-trafficking intelligence, tokenization, which in this market is still nascent, biodiversity credits, which are also being developed and being deployed, but very novel still. So the market is expected to catch up in about 3 years or so, that it becomes substantial enough to be sizable. And where we are at, we currently have the prototype. We have a lot of developments since then internally, and we're getting ready for delivering our proof of concept this year. And we're open for that as an investment opportunity. And from there on, after that proof of concept, we can start commercializing and rolling out and replicating, and go into sector diversification, enterprise services, etc. And obviously, we're not doing this alone. We have a huge group of experts, with the satellite data partners. We have academic partners. We in Cornell University. We have hardware partners because we don't do any hardware ourselves. But most importantly, we have our IoT and software partners. Microsoft has already provided $1 million in-kind services for the core Azure foundational services stack that we're building on. And we have development partners in Kenya and Ghana for both the IoT services and the AI services, which is really part of our core model, is to also develop in Africa, provide capital into Africa for the education there, for employment there, and to bring this knowledge and intelligence into the continent and have them build these capabilities themselves. So that was a fly through. I have no idea about time. I haven't been stopped, but I think we have a couple of minutes left. So I'll just give it open for our host to bring up some questions.
Well, I definitely have a question for you, and that was a great presentation, Bastiaan. I definitely want to ask and put it out there. Who are the investors? How can they contact you? And what type of partnership are you really aiming to establish?
Yeah, so I can be reached. The easiest is on LinkedIn. I'm gonna look at my profile here on the platform with I think my phone number and email is there as well. Otherwise, there's only one Zambezi. Zambezi Zero is the full name of the company. So look forward to anybody who has ideas or wants to be part of this. I'm mostly looking at private investors at this point, so we have a couple on board already. Particularly because we're expecting there may be pivots and learning curves along the way, which may not fit the traditional venture capital model very well. But private investors, that this is kind of for whom this is preaching to the choir, right? They don't have to make them understand why this is needed, but that are intrigued by how we can provide a solution where the push and pull come together, where we're servicing both the organization on the ground and the financial markets and the investment market with this kind of granular data. And the ones that understand that this is actually pretty unique, that this does not exist, and that we've flipped the paradigm here of, just we're not one of the 1,000 satellite data companies that provides input into these sectors. And we're actually building it from the ground up, and our data sets are going to be significantly more powerful than anything else that exists today.
What is your raise, and what's the minimum that you're really seeking for that next private investor?
Yeah, the total raise is 2 million, and we're actually oversubscribed at this point. But that's nothing is locked until it's locked in the bank. So we're looking at the first 250,000 will get the first 3 milestones going. So that's open for investment. We'll take about 50,000 as a minimum. So the first 5 sort of angel level investors can still step in until the big tickets come through, which could happen as it's committed now verbally in the next 2 months.
Okay, excellent. Well, I don't know if there's any other, as it's 10 o'clock right now, just to sign off to say thank you for joining, and any investors interested, they can contact myself and you directly, and happy to facilitate those engagements.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Looking forward
Bastiaan.
to it. Thank you.